was meant to be a celebration of American sport abroad. An NBA showcase game in London, a packed arena, cameras rolling, and then a voice from the crowd. Leave Greenland alone. A single heckle cutting through the U.S. national anthem, turning a sports spectacle into a geopolitical moment. Actor and singer Vanessa Williams continued performing, but the interruption landed. Applause followed, cheers echoed, and suddenly a growing transatlantic dispute had found a new stage, not in Brussels or Washington, but inside London's O2 Arena. The timing was no accident. For weeks, U.S. President Donald Trump has escalated pressure on Europe over Greenland, not with diplomacy, but with tariffs. A proposed 25% levy aimed at European economies unless the United States is allowed to acquire the autonomous Danish territory. The threat widened quickly. Denmark first, then Germany, France, the UK, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and the Netherlands. A phased tariff plan, 10% rising to 25%, tied directly to Trump's demands. Territory, not trade, now driving economic punishment. European leaders pushed back hard. Britain's Prime Minister called the move completely wrong. Germany and France used a far stronger word, blackmail. Behind closed doors, EU officials began discussing countermeasures, including retaliatory tariffs and trade freezes.
I mean, we have been asking since the very beginning of this to have a constructive dialogue with our American ally and friends, free from social media and headlines and strong words. And we opened that dialogue last week. We will not give up on that. I mean, I have an agreement with the American Vice President. It was reconfirmed after we have listened to the press spokesperson. So we will stay on track unless US decide differently. But then at the same time, of course, we need the European Union to respond. I will not develop that response at this press conference. There is close consultation going on among our European friends. I foresee that there will be, also a meeting among foreign ministers, and we will also continue close consultations with those European countries who are not members of the European Union but still integrated in the single market, and even more importantly, a member of NATO, because this is not only about the European Union, it's basically about, the NATO alliance.
The very essence of NATO is to protect the sovereign integrity and territorial integrity of its member states. So that's what it's all about. And that is, again, rooted in the collective right of self-defense in the UN Charter, which is deeply committed. And I want to reiterate what also Lars has said, that we have two messages that we share with all the countries we mentioned in this, not only the 8, but with all, I would say, all the European countries and Canada, is that on the one hand, we stand with the Kingdom of Denmark in defense of its sovereignty. But we're also ready to do more together with America and with all our allies in the Arctic. And that's exactly why we are stepping up our presence in Greenland, because if there are security concerns, we can meet them jointly, both bilaterally, Denmark and the US, but also as a NATO alliance. And Norway has for decades been arguing that NATO should take a stronger role generally in the Arctic. We would, of course, say that there are other parts of the Arctic where there is more immediate need, but in principle, throughout the Arctic, and out of the 8 countries who happen to be in the Arctic, 7 are NATO members. So we're actually quite well prepared to deal with existing and future security challenges in the Arctic. So that's a dual message that we're sending to our friends in the United States of America.
Norway's position remains the same. We will not allow ourselves to be put under pressure, and those types of threats of U.S. tariffs are unacceptable between close allies. Yes, the American president is unconventional, to put it diplomatically, but America is also something other and more than the American president. I trust the world. there are also checks and balances in American society, and not essentially gives me a belief that when we stand together and when we are able to explain what is at stake, and it is not only Europe for which things are at stake, there are major things at stake for the United States as well, then we will also get through this. I mean, that is something one has to believe in and something to work for.
That is why yesterday I spoke to President Trump, to European leaders, and to the Secretary General of NATO to find a solution rooted in partnership, facts, and mutual respect. Because that is how strong alliances protect shared interests. The same is true on other issues. Britain is a pragmatic country. We look for agreement. We believe in partnership. We prefer solutions to slogans. And we will not indulge in commentary and gesture politics that harm the British people. But being pragmatic does not mean being passive. And partnership does not mean abandoning principle. That is why it's important to be clear about who we stand with, what we stand for, and where our interests lie. Now, this is a moment for the whole country to pull together. So I warmly welcome the support we've had with regards to Greenland and the proposed tariffs from the leader of the opposition. I thank her for her support. And firstly, to underscore your point, this has been very badly received across the United Kingdom. We're allies of the United States, and we work closely with them, and therefore I'm not surprised by the reaction that's been across the United Kingdom, and it is a very serious situation. Our job is to ensure that we find a way forward consistent with our principles and our values and consistent with our national interest. And the US remains a close ally on defence, on security and on intelligence, on nuclear capability. We work very closely with the United States, and we must never lose sight of our national interest in that. But we must stand up for our values. We must be clear about the principles that we are applying here, and we'll continue to do so. What I'm going to do now is to focus on our national interest and be absolutely clear that that requires us to be clear about the principles that we apply to a situation like this, in particular that the future of Greenland is for Greenland and the Denmark Kingdom, and that tariffs should not be used against allies in this way. In relation to the escalation, look, a tariff war is in nobody's interests, and we have not got to that stage, and my focus, therefore, is making sure we don't get to that stage, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. I spoke to President Trump yesterday, as I think you all know, and I'll no doubt speak to him again in coming days. Continually, our offices talk all the time, but we must find a pragmatic, sensible, sustained way through this that avoids some of the consequences that will be very serious for our country. Firstly, I don't think it's right for us to choose between the US and Europe. And that's not a new position today, that's the position I've consistently held, as have previous governments, because we are allies with our European partners and allies with the US. And the strength in being able to keep both those alliances has served us well over the last 80 years. So this is not a moment to sort of choose one between the other. I have argued, and this is not an argument for the first time today, and I've spoken to European allies and leaders about the need for Europe to step up and do more in its own defence and security. I feel that over many years we've not paid enough attention to what we European nations can and should do in our own defence, and this reinforces why it's important that we do that in defence and security. And defence and security these days, of course, includes energy and resilience and cyber, as well as the traditional defence and security. Europe has to step up into that space, and that's an argument I've been leading on and making for a number of months now with our European partners, and will continue to do so. That is one of the things I discussed with President Trump yesterday in relation to those forces which were clearly there to assess and work on risk from the Russians. And so there's real clarity, I hope, about that. In relation to the relationship, we must never lose sight of the fact that on defence, security, intelligence and nuclear capability, we work very closely with our US allies, and it's in our national interest to continue to do so. On the question of NATO, it is in all of our interest to make sure that NATO remains strong and stable. We had a very good NATO summit last year with more members than we've had before, with more unity than many people thought we would achieve. And NATO remains the single most effective and successful military alliance the world has ever known. And so it's in all of our interests to make sure that nothing is done to weaken NATO. Firstly, what I meant by the downward spiral is the potential for this to cause huge damage for the UK, whether that's in a trade war or the weakening of alliances. And I do not want to see that happen. That doesn't mean that we put to one side our principles and our values, quite the contrary. We're very clear about what they are, which is why I wanted to have this press conference this morning and to affirm those principles and values that we apply. In relation to the EU, look, firstly, we're coordinating very closely with the EU. I spoke to a number of EU leaders last night. I spoke to Ursula von der Leyen last night and intend to do so again either today or tomorrow, so that we're closely aligned. There's proper unity and coordination in our response. They will decide exactly what they will do next during the course of today and the coming days.